An avoidant lives their whole relational life inside a single equation, though they would never phrase it this way and mostly do not know they are solving it. On one side of the equation sits the fear of being engulfed, of being needed too much, of losing themselves inside another person's closeness. On the other side sits the fear of being alone, of losing the connection entirely, of the emptiness that follows when the person is truly gone. Their every move, every push, and every pull is an attempt to keep those two fears balanced, to stay in the narrow zone where neither one overwhelms them, and for as long as you were present, the fear of engulfment was the louder of the two, which is why they kept creating distance, kept withdrawing, kept treating your closeness as the threat. But your absence changes the equation entirely. In your absence, the fear of engulfment goes quiet, because there is no closeness to fear, and the other fear, the fear of having truly lost you, begins to grow. And when that second fear finally grows larger than the first, the avoidant turns around and comes back. Not because they have changed, because the equation has tipped. This is the thing you most need to understand about an avoidance return, and it is both more hopeful and more sobering than the story your longing wants to tell. Their coming back is real. The feeling behind it is real, but it is very often not the product of a person who has become capable of closeness. It is the product of a person whose fear of losing you has temporarily outgrown their fear of having you. And the moment they have you again, the moment the loss is no longer threatened, the equation tips back, the fear of engulfment reasserts itself, and the person who reached for you so desperately becomes, once more, the person who needs to create distance in order to breathe. This is why so many reunions with avoidance follow the same devastating arc. The return is genuine, the reunion is euphoric, and then, as the closeness settles in, the old withdrawal begins again, right on schedule, because nothing in the underlying equation was ever solved. The absence simply tipped it one way, and your return tipped it back. It is worth pausing to absorb what it did to you to love someone whose heart was governed by that equation, because you have probably blamed yourself for a great deal that was never yours to carry. When you love a person who is perpetually balancing two fears by adjusting the distance between you, you end up living inside a connection that can never settle, that keeps pulling you close and pushing you away for reasons you cannot see and did not cause. And a normal human heart, placed inside that instability, begins to strain, to doubt itself, to search endlessly for the thing it must be doing wrong. You are not doing anything wrong. You are simply the other person in an equation you did not write and could not solve, and the fact that it wore you down is not a sign of your weakness, but the predictable effect of loving someone whose fears kept overriding their love. Understanding that the whole thing was an equation, rather than a verdict on you, is the beginning of setting down a weight you were never meant to carry. Before we go further, you need to hear this plainly, because everything else depends on it. The fact that they are coming back is not, by itself, a reason to let them. Their return may prove that they miss you, that they regret hurting you, that you mattered more than they ever let you see. It does not prove that they have become someone who can stay. And letting them back in on the strength of the feeling alone, without any evidence that the underlying equation has actually changed, is very often a way of signing up for the next departure, because a person who returns because their fear of loss spiked will withdraw again the moment that fear is soothed. You would not be reuniting with a changed person. You would be re-entering an equation that is guaranteed to tip back the moment you make yourself available to be lost again. Let us talk honestly about what it means that they can feel your absence now when they could not seem to feel your presence then, because this is one of the strangest and most painful features of the avoidant heart. While you were there, your closeness triggered their defenses, and the defenses muffled the feeling, so they experienced you at a reduced intensity, a version of you dimmed down to something they could manage. They could not feel the full weight of what you were, because feeling it would have meant needing you, and needing you was the very thing their whole system was built to prevent. Your absence removes the trigger. With no closeness to defend against, the defense is quiet, and the feeling they were holding off arrives at last, unmuffled, at full strength. So they feel your absence more intensely than they ever felt your presence, not because absence is more powerful than presence, but because absence is the only condition under which their defenses will let them feel you at all. Sit with the sadness of that because it explains so much. The person could only love you fully once you were gone. Your presence was the one thing that prevented them from feeling the depth of what they had, and this means their return is built on a feeling that your presence will, in all likelihood, muffle all over again. They are reaching for you from within a clarity that only exists because you are absent, and if you return, you dissolve the very condition that produced the clarity. The feeling that is driving them back is a feeling your presence tends to switch off. This is the cruel paradox at the heart of the avoidance return, and it is the single most important thing to hold on to when their reaching tempts you, because it means the passionate, clear-eyed love they are offering from across the distance is not a love your nearness can sustain. It is a love that lives in the gap and dies in the closeness. And they regret hurting you. This part is real too, and it can be the most moving of all, so it deserves to be handled with care. As the defenses quiet in your absence, the avoidant becomes able to feel not only the loss of you, but the cost of their own behavior, the specific recognition that their withdrawal, their coldness, their inability to give you what you needed caused you real pain. While you were present, this recognition was blocked because to feel the full impact of what they were doing would have required lowering the defenses that the behavior was protecting. But in your absence, the recognition surfaces, and it often surfaces with a force that surprises them, a guilt and a sorrow they did not know they were capable of. Their regret is genuine. They really are sorry. And you must understand with great clarity that their being sorry is not the same as their being safe, because the regret addresses the past while safety is a question about the future, and the two are answered by completely different things. This distinction is the one that will protect you, so let us make it unmistakable. Sorry is a feeling about what already happened. Safe is a prediction about what will happen next. We are trained to treat an apology as a kind of clearance, as though being told sorry restores a person to trustworthiness. It does not. An avoidant can be genuinely, deeply sorry and still be entirely unsafe to build a life with, because the sorrow lives in the same person whose defenses will reassert themselves the instant closeness becomes real again. The past is answered by remorse. The future is answered only by demonstrated, sustained change, and the return you are being offered speaks to the first while guaranteeing nothing about the second. The longing will try to collapse these two into one, will hear the sorrow and conclude that safety must follow, that a person who feels this badly could not possibly hurt you the same way again. But feeling badly about the harm and being incapable of repeating the harm are unrelated, because the harm was never driven by a lack of caring in the first place. It was driven by the equation, by the fear of engulfment that reasserts itself the moment you are close, and no amount of remorse touches that equation. There is a phenomenon you should know about because it explains a great deal about why avoidants come back, and it is not the flattering explanation the longing prefers. Very often, an avoidant returns not simply because they rediscovered your value, but because whatever they reached for, instead of you failed to deliver what they hoped. In the space of your absence, they may have sought the freedom they thought they wanted, or the distance they believed they needed, or even another connection that promised to be less threatening, and found that none of it soothed the thing they were trying to soothe. And so they turn back toward you, partly out of genuine feeling, and partly out of the discovery that the alternative was emptier than they expected. This does not make their return meaningless, but it does mean you should be cautious about reading it purely as a verdict on your irreplaceable worth. Sometimes the return is love, sometimes it is the failure of the alternatives. Usually it is some mixture of the two, and the mixture matters, because a return driven partly by the emptiness of other options is a return that can reverse itself the moment a more appealing option appears, or the moment the fear of engulfment outgrows the fear of loss once again. So how do you tell whether their return represents something real enough to consider, or merely the equation temporarily tipping? You cannot tell from the intensity, because a tipped equation is intense. You cannot tell from the sincerity of the words, because the words can be completely sincere and still be produced by absence rather than by change. What you can look at is whether there is any evidence of genuine internal work behind the reaching, any sign that they have actually grappled with the equation itself, begun to understand why closeness triggers their retreat, started to do something about it beyond simply missing you. A return that is all feeling and no reckoning, all longing and no changed capacity, is the equation tipping, not the equation being solved. And if you accept it, you accept the next tip back along with it. Understand what genuine change would even look like, so you are not left guessing when the moment arrives. It would not look like a passionate reunion or a tearful apology. It would look like the avoidant being able to tolerate the very closeness that always triggered their retreat, staying present through the discomfort they used to flee, choosing connection at the exact junctures where they always chose distance, and doing so consistently over time, even after the fear of losing you has been soothed by your return. That is the real test, and it is a test the return cannot pass on its own, because the return happens while the fear of loss is still high, while the equation is still tipped in your favor. The true test only comes later, once you are close again, and the fear of engulfment reawakens, and whether they can stay present through that reawakening rather than withdrawing is the only thing that actually tells you whether anything has changed. And you are under no obligation to reopen your whole life in order to run that test on their behalf. It is worth naming a further layer of why the return, however genuine, tends to reverse itself, because it protects you from the hope that this time the equation will hold. The avoidant does not experience their own oscillation as oscillation. In the moment of reaching, they genuinely believe they want to come all the way back, genuinely feel that the distance was a mistake, genuinely mean every warm word, and then closeness returns and the fear of engulfment reawakens, and in that moment they genuinely feel with equal conviction that they need distance, that the closeness is too much, that something is wrong. They are sincere at both ends of the swing, which is exactly what makes them so confusing to love, because you keep believing the sincere reaching and keep being blindsided by the sincere withdrawal, never realizing that both are true expressions of the same unresolved equation. So when they return now, full of sincere feeling, understand that the sincerity is real, and also that it is only one end of a swing whose other end is just as real and just as inevitable, and that returning would mean signing up for the whole pendulum, not just the warm arc of it you are seeing from across the distance. Let me speak to the moment their return actually arrives, because the abstract understanding is far easier than the lived reality. When the reaching comes and your whole body floods with the old hope and the old love, the wisest first move is to do nothing at all, not to decide in the flood. The flood is the longing, roaring at the sudden reappearance of the thing it has wanted for so long, and decisions made inside that roar serve the longing rather than the person you are becoming. Let it recede. Move from the part of you that is reacting to the part that remembers, the part that knows exactly how this went, the part that has already survived the ending once and has no wish to survive it a second time. Only from that steadier place can you weigh what is actually being offered rather than what the flood insists is being offered. There is no message so urgent that it cannot wait for the flood to pass, and any return that pressures you to answer before you can think clearly is a return that is serving its own urgency rather than your well-being. And you are allowed to say no. This has to be said plainly because the entire cultural script around a lover's return assumes that if they come back and mean it, the right and generous thing is to let them in. You are permitted to receive their return, be moved by it, believe their regret completely, and still decide that you will not walk back through that door. You are permitted to have healed far enough that their reaching arrives as an echo from a life you no longer live, rather than a summons back to it. Their missing you does not obligate you to give them another chance to hurt you. Their regret does not place a debt on your future. You do not owe your reopened heart to their belated recognition of what they lost. No, spoken clearly, without cruelty and without apology, is a complete and honorable answer, and you never need more justification for it than that you have chosen not to. Guard too against being pulled back into the role of their comfort, because this is one of the subtler traps of the return. An avoidant coming back is often seeking relief from the pain of the absence and the guilt of having hurt you, and a return aimed at relieving their feeling can quietly ask you to take care of them again, to soothe their remorse, to reassure them that they are not a bad person, to make their homecoming easy and comfortable. You have almost certainly already spent much of the relationship in exactly that role, managing their feelings so they could tolerate the closeness. If their return simply reinstalls you there, now, as the caretaker of their guilt and the soother of their loneliness, then it is not a new chapter. It is the oldest chapter of all, wearing the costume of a reunion. A genuine return does not need you to make it comfortable. It is willing to sit in the discomfort of what it did, does not rush you, does not require your reassurance to feel complete. Watch closely which one you are being offered, because the difference between a return that repairs and a return that recruits is the difference between a future that heals and one that wounds you all over again. And do not, in the tenderness of the moment, do the work of the reunion for them. There is a generous instinct, especially in someone who loves deeply, to meet a hesitant return halfway, to smooth its path, to reach back the instant they reach toward you so the reconciliation can finally happen. But watch what that generosity produces. When you do the work of closing the distance, you relieve the avoidant of the one experience that might actually have changed them, which is having to fully face and fully overcome their own avoidance in order to come back to you. You make the reckoning unnecessary. You teach them one more time that they never have to do the hard thing because you will always do it for them. If they are truly coming back and truly different, then the work of the return is theirs to do, and the fact that it is hard for them is not a reason for you to make it easy. The difficulty is the point. Their willingness to endure it without your rescuing them from it is itself part of the evidence you are waiting for. There is a harder possibility that must be faced, because pretending otherwise would fail you. The equation may never tip. Not every avoidant comes back. For some, the fear of engulfment remains so much louder than the fear of loss that the return never arrives, and the feeling that formed in your absence stays trapped behind the same defenses that ended things, unspoken and unacted upon, perhaps for the rest of their lives. If this is your situation, waiting for a return that shows no sign of coming, hear this with particular care. The absence of their return is not a verdict about you. It is produced by the same broken machinery that failed you all along, and the failure to come back is a failure of their capacity, not a measure of your worth or even of the depth of their regret. A person can carry an unreturned love to the end of their days and have it be entirely real and still never manage to act on it, and none of that reflects on whether you deserve to be returned to. You did deserve it. That you may not receive it is a tragedy located entirely inside their limitations, not yours, and you do not need their return to complete your healing, because your wholeness was never something they had to hand back to you. You can build your closure yourself out of your own clear understanding of what happened, your own acknowledgement of your own pain, your own decision that the chapter is finished, whether or not they ever come back to close it. Waiting for their return to make you whole is waiting for a frightened person to grant you permission to stop hurting, and you do not need their permission. You can grant it to yourself today without them, and the peace you build that way is far more durable than any peace that depended on their reaching, because it cannot be taken from you by their absence or destabilized by their return. It also helps to understand who the avoidant is really reaching for when they come back, because it guards you against a subtle confusion. Across the distance, memory does something to their picture of you. While you were present, their defenses kept the good of the connection dimmed, so they knew you through a filter that made you feel more manageable and less precious than you were. But memory operating over distance loses that filter. The good moments brighten, the difficulties fade, and you begin to glow in their recollection with a warmth they could not feel while living beside you. So the you they reach for is partly a construction, an idealized memory sharpened by longing, and not necessarily the actual you with your actual needs that they struggled so hard to stay close to. The memory makes no demands, poses no threat, cannot get near enough to trigger the defenses, which is exactly why it is so easy for them to long for. Nostalgia is not readiness. Missing the memory of you is not the same as being able to hold the fact of you, and if you return on the strength of their longing, you return as a real person, meeting a remembered ideal, and the gap between the two reasserts itself the moment you are close again. There is a cruel irony in the timing of an avoidance return that you should brace for, because it catches people off guard again and again. The equation tips back toward you not when you are at your lowest, but precisely when you have begun to heal. While you were still visibly hurting, still hoping, still hovering near their orbit, the fear of losing you stayed low because you had not really gone anywhere. You were still there, still reachable, still theirs to return to whenever they chose. It is only when you genuinely begin to move on, when your energy turns toward your own life and away from their door, that the fear of loss finally spikes high enough to overcome the fear of engulfment, and the equation tips, and they come back. Which means the return is often triggered by your healing rather than arriving to assist it. The further you travel from them, the more likely they are to appear, pulled back by the very distance your recovery created. And if you understand this, you will not make the mistake of reading their return as a reason to abandon the healing that summoned it. Their reaching back is not an invitation to reverse your progress. It is evidence that your progress worked. Let something land here for the part of you that has ached to be wanted, because there is a truth in their return you are allowed to keep, even if you keep the door firmly closed. Their coming back is proof that you mattered, proof that you were not, as you may have feared in the dark hours, easily replaced or quickly forgotten, proof that you left a mark deep enough to survive their defenses and grow across the distance into something they could not ignore. You spent so much of the relationship reaching for evidence that you meant something to them, and they gave you so little of it that you began to doubt your own significance. And the evidence you were looking for was never going to appear while you were present, because your presence was the very thing that kept their feeling muffled. It could only surface in your absence. So their return hands you, at last, the proof you were always denied. You mattered. You were never the forgettable one. The failure was never in your worth. It was in their capacity to feel your worth while you were close enough to reach. But hold this carefully, because it is exactly the kind of truth that can become a leash if you are not watchful. Being proof that you mattered is not the same as being a reason to return, and the longing will try to fuse the two. Let the return confirm your worth, let it heal the specific wound of doubting whether you were ever significant to them, and then let that be the whole of what it does. You can take the vindication and leave the reunion. You can accept gratefully the evidence of your importance and still decline to hand your future to a person whose importance to you was never in question, but whose ability to honor it always was. The proof of your mattering is a gift you are allowed to keep. The obligation to act on it is a fiction you are free to refuse, and refusing it is not bitterness. It is simply the wisdom of someone who has learned that being loved and being able to be loved well are two different things.